I'm Margaret Ellison, 36 years old, and I can still hear the sound of my own heels on the pavement that day, steady, purposeful, just before the guard stepped in front of me at the doors of the Willowgate Hotel. He didn't ask for my name. He was already shaking his head when my parents stepped beside him. My father didn't blink when he said it. "You're not on the list." I looked past them toward the grand staircase where my sister stood, her wedding dress catching the light, her smile as sharp as ever. She didn't wave, she didn't speak, just stood there while phones came out and strangers watched me, freeze in place before I go any further. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever walked into a room thinking you were family and realized you weren't even considered a guest. I was raised in North Carolina, born and bred just outside Charlotte, in a town where everyone knew everyone, and every Sunday was spent on a front porch or folding chairs in the church lot. My parents, Kenneth and Diane Ellison, believed in hard work appearances and saying the right thing, even if you didn't mean it. They ran a modest real estate company, and they held themselves like people who wanted to be known, respected, smiled at, on the street. Growing up, the message was always clear. Caroline, my younger sister, was the shining one. She had the smile, the following, the big dreams, and I was the steady one. I worked hard, did my part, studied marketing, and built a quiet life of structure and routine, while Caroline chased the world online and found it waiting with open arms. At first I thought the distance between us was just how siblings turned out. Sometimes she leaned into performance and attention while I leaned into planning and problem solving. She'd post pictures in Paris while I built ad campaigns from my kitchen table. But somewhere along the way, the gap widened. She stopped asking how I was, and my parents stopped noticing whether I was even in the room still. I gave what I had when the business hit hard times. I chipped in $10,000, no questions asked. And later, when Mom hinted about tight wedding budgets, I didn't wait to be asked. I just offered to help. I paid for things here and there, little amounts that added up, florals, shipping fittings. I thought that's what family did. No receipt, no score, just support Caroline's wedding planning. Swept through the family like a tidal wave. There were calls, emails, venue discussions. But every time I spoke up, my suggestions were brushed aside when I recommended a local florist. Caroline laughed and said, "This isn't a school fundraiser." Mom nodded along. I let it go, tried again. A week later, same result, I told myself. I'd show up. Smile, bring warmth. And maybe that would matter more. I found a navy dress, a soft satin with just enough shimmer to feel like I belonged in that room. It cost me $500, and more than that. In silent hope, the invitation came in the mail, a thick card with raised lettering addressed just to me. No +1. No mention of family, but it was there, and that was enough. Or so I thought. My best friend Nathan warned me gently one morning over coffee. He said, "Margaret, sometimes showing up doesn't change what people don't see." I smiled, told him it would be fine. Told myself the same thing the night before the wedding. I called Mom to ask what I could bring. She said, "Just show up." Margaret, and hung up, so I did. And when I reached that hotel, when the guard looked down at the tablet and then back up at me with that measured pause, when my parents stepped forward with no flicker of apology in their eyes, when my sister stood just inside the doors with a look that said this was all exactly as planned, something in me started to shift. That's where I'll stop for now, because what came next was the unraveling. The part where everything I thought I knew about my family cracked wide open, and nothing was ever the same again. I got back to my car and just sat, staring at the steering wheel. The dress felt too tight all of a sudden, like it was holding in all the things I hadn't said. I turned the key, but I didn't drive right away. Through the windshield, I could still see the glow of the hotel, soft and golden, like the whole world was inside having a good time without me. When I finally pulled out of the parking lot, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. The city passed by in blurs, streetlights, storefronts, families out for dinner, and I kept thinking, how did it come to this? Back at my apartment, I didn't even take off the dress. I walked straight to the couch, sat down, and picked up my phone. I didn't want to, but the notifications were already coming in. My best friend Nathan had posted a short video to his story, just a few seconds of me standing outside the hotel while my parents turned me away. He hadn't tagged anyone, just the caption, "Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers." I didn't know whether to thank him or ask him to take it down. I just stared at it. Comments were already piling up. Some people were kind, others weren't. A few recognized me. One comment said, "That's her, I follow her sister." Another wrote, "Why show up if you weren't invited?" I set the phone down and let it buzz on the coffee table. Somewhere out there, my sister was dancing in a ballroom filled with strangers and orchids flown in from somewhere tropical. I imagined the music, the speeches, the fake laughter for her videos. And I thought about how I'd spent the last year bending over backward to support a family that didn't even blink when they left me outside. That night I didn't sleep much. The navy gown hung over the back of the chair like it was still waiting for the party to start. I turned my phone face down, but I could still feel the weight of it. The next morning I told my boss I was sick and stayed home. I couldn't face anyone. I kept thinking someone from work had probably seen the video. Maybe even our clients. I opened my laptop out of habit, but the spreadsheet I had left open just blinked back at me. Later that day, I finally listened to the voicemails. Mom's was short. "Margaret, we need to talk about this. Call me back." Dad sounded tired. "Call us, please." Neither of them said they were sorry. Neither asked if I was all right. I deleted both messages. I tried to go about the day like normal, washed some dishes, folded laundry, but everything felt hollow. Even the hum of the dryer seemed louder than usual. And then I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Caroline had posted from her honeymoon. A photo of her lounging on a white sand beach, smiling behind oversized sunglasses. The caption read, "Grateful for the people who really support me. No room for negativity." I read it twice. It was like watching someone rewrite a story you were still living through. Her followers flooded the comments. "Ignore the drama queen. You deserve peace." A few called her out, asked why her sister had been turned away, but she didn't reply. She never did when the story didn't fit the brand. I spent the rest of the day avoiding everyone. Nathan texted again, asking if I'd seen the reactions. I didn't answer. He knocked once, just a soft knock at the door, but I stayed quiet. I couldn't bear the look in his eyes, the pity, the worry. I just needed space to think. Late that night, I finally did what I'd been putting off. I opened the shared family account. I hadn't checked it in a while. I never had reason to. I'd trusted Dad to manage it. I just kept adding money over the years whenever things got tight. At last count, I'd contributed over $25,000. The balance loaded slowly, and when it did, my stomach dropped. There had been a withdrawal $30,000 just 3 weeks ago. One transaction gone. No note, no explanation. I clicked through the statement again, convinced I'd misread it. But the number didn't change. The transfer had gone to an account I didn't recognize. I just sat there frozen. My chest felt tight, like my ribs were locked in place. I'd already been shut out of the wedding. Now it looked like they'd used my money to help pay for it. I called Dad first. He answered on the third ring like he'd been expecting me. "Margaret, you finally called back," he said, like I was the one hiding. I asked him straight out what happened to the $30,000. There was a long pause. Then he muttered, "We needed it for the business. Things were getting rough." I reminded him that I'd already given thousands to keep things going. "You didn't ask," I said. "That money was mine too." He said we could talk about it later, then hung up. Next I tried Mom. Her voicemail was cheerful, but when she answered, her voice was cold. "This isn't a good time, Margaret," she said. I told her about the withdrawal. Her tone sharpened. "It was for the wedding," she said. "And business expenses. You wouldn't understand." I pushed harder. "I already gave $10,000, I said. Why didn't you tell me?" Her answer came fast. "Don't make this about you. We did what we had to." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, then set it down gently like it might explode. The weight of it all hit me then. Not just the wedding, not just the money, but every time I'd been asked to do more, give more, stay quiet, stay polite. I thought about calling Caroline, but I knew how that would go. She'd say I was creating drama. She'd say I was jealous. So instead I sent a short text. Did you know they used my savings for your wedding? Hours passed. When she finally replied, it was one line. Stop stirring drama, Margaret. Focus on your own life. I stared at the screen, feeling the last piece of something fall away. The family I'd tried to hold together had already made their choice, and for the first time, I let myself believe it. That night, I picked up my notebook and started writing down everything, every dollar I'd contributed, every time I was brushed aside, every time I was made to feel small. The list was longer than I expected. By the time I put the pen down, the sky was just beginning to lighten. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew this much: whatever they thought they were protecting by cutting me out, it wasn't going to protect them much longer. I'd been quiet for too long, and I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee I never finished. The sun was barely up, but I hadn't really slept. The walls of the apartment were quiet, too quiet, like everything in them was waiting to see what I'd do next. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the calls with my parents, and I hadn't responded to Caroline's message. I wasn't sure what there was to say. I opened my laptop again. The same bank account still sat on the screen, the numbers unchanged. The transaction was right there, bold and final. $30,000 transferred to someone I didn't know. My name wasn't mentioned, but I could see my fingerprints all over it. Every deposit I'd made over the years, every quiet transfer when someone said the business was struggling or Caroline's launch event was coming up, it was all in there. No one had asked. No one had warned me. Later that day, I went downstairs to get the mail. I didn't want to see anyone, but I passed a neighbor in the hallway, a woman who always smiled at me on laundry days. She gave me a look this time, sympathetic, soft around the edges. I nodded, said nothing, and kept walking. In the mailroom, someone had left a stack of gossip magazines on the shelf near the elevator. One of the covers had Caroline's photo, dressed in her honeymoon best with the headline, "Family Feud at the Aisle, I Didn't Touch It." I just stood there for a moment, then took my envelope and left. By the time I got back inside, the video had made its way to a local gossip blog. Not just the clip Nathan had posted, but slowed down, replayed, dissected in the comments. One still showed me standing at the hotel entrance, shoulders back, trying to smile. They'd blurred my face, but anyone who knew me would recognize the dress. One commenter said, "The sister needs to get over herself." Another guessed at my motives, probably wanted to cause drama. I closed the laptop. That evening, I made myself a small dinner, just toast and eggs, but barely touched it. I sat on the couch in silence, the plate on the coffee table, the dress still hanging over the chair across the room. I should have put it away, but I couldn't. It felt like a marker, a reminder of where I'd been when everything snapped. A few friends reached out, kind messages mostly. One coworker from the marketing team sent a text that said, "Saw the video. Thinking of you. You didn't deserve that." I didn't write back. I didn't know how to explain that hearing those words just made it worse. Like someone had looked right into the moment I wanted most to forget. I avoided my parents' calls. More voicemails came in. My mom's tone got shorter. "Margaret, we need to talk. This has gone too far." My dad left one that sounded like he was pacing. "Please don't blow this up. It's a misunderstanding." But I didn't feel misunderstood. I felt erased. I tried to focus on work. I opened a spreadsheet from a client I'd been managing for 6 months. It was clean, well-organized, something I could usually dive into, but the numbers blurred together. I kept thinking of that missing $30,000. Of all the times I'd stayed late to meet a deadline just so I could send money when Dad said the business needed a buffer. I'd called it a family emergency fund. I don't think anyone else ever did. The next afternoon, Nathan stopped by. I hadn't invited him. He just showed up with a bag of groceries and didn't ask questions when I didn't smile. He unloaded everything into the fridge, talking softly about nothing new. Coffee shop near his office, a neighbor's dog that got loose again. He didn't bring up the video, didn't ask about the dress. But as he stood by the counter and poured 2 glasses of water, he looked over at me and said, "You haven't done anything wrong, Margaret." I didn't answer. He didn't push. After he left, I sat on the floor beside my couch and opened the folder where I'd been writing things down. I started listing every payment I could remember: florist deposit business, shortfall, Caroline's brand launch, the couch Mom said she'd pay me back for. The numbers lined up in a quiet, steady trail, each one a version of myself trying to be enough. By the end of the week, the noise online had started to change. Some of Caroline's followers were asking questions she didn't answer. One even commented, "Was that your sister in the video?" Another wrote, "If this is what family means, I'm out." Caroline posted a new photo, all sunshine and latte foam, with a caption about choosing joy. I didn't like it. I didn't save it. But I saw it. My mom sent another message that night. "Don't believe everything you see. Family is more than money, Margaret." I deleted it. On Sunday, I went for a walk through Freedom Park, just a quiet loop past the lake. The air was warm, a little muggy, and the trees swayed like they had no idea anything had changed. I sat on a bench and watched 2 kids feed ducks near the water. It was calm there, still. Nobody knew my name. I stayed until the sun dipped low, then walked home in the long evening light. The apartment was quiet again, but it didn't feel quite as heavy. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the papers I'd printed from the bank site. One line stared back at me: "Transfer to Prestige Planners." That was the name Caroline had posted about months ago, the luxury wedding team she tagged in every story. I hadn't put it together until now. I folded the printout in half and placed it inside the folder with everything else. Then I picked up my pen and wrote 3 words on a new page: "This is theft." I sat there for a while before I turned out the light. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew I wasn't imagining things, I wasn't overreacting, and I wasn't going to keep pretending it didn't matter. Whatever came next, I was going to face it on my own terms. The next morning I woke before the sun came up. The apartment was still just the faint hum of the fridge and the creak of the floorboards when I stepped into the kitchen. I made a pot of coffee, not because I wanted it, but because it gave me something to do with my hands. The folder I'd filled with statements and handwritten notes was still sitting on the kitchen table. I hadn't opened it again since the night before, but I kept looking at it like it might move on its own. By mid-morning, I couldn't sit still anymore. I changed into jeans and a sweater, pulled my hair back, and drove to the bank. It was a small branch downtown, not far from where I used to meet Dad for lunch, back when things felt normal. The manager's name was Janice. She had a firm handshake and a calm voice, the kind of woman who'd seen just about everything and didn't rattle easy. I laid out the documents, my contributions, the account activity, the withdrawal to Prestige Planners, and told her everything I knew. I didn't dress it up, just facts. She listened closely, barely glancing at the clock, then looked down at the screen and pulled up the account records. The $30,000 transfer, she said, scrolling, was made 3 weeks ago. That name, Prestige Planners, it's listed as a vendor for luxury event services. I didn't say anything for a moment. I'd known it. I'd felt it. But hearing it out loud did something I wasn't ready for. Janice turned the screen toward me. It came from the shared family account. No authorization request was submitted. "Since you're a named holder, you should have been notified." She printed the page and slid it across the desk. Her voice was gentle. "You may want to speak with someone about this." "Legally." I thanked her, took the printout, and walked back to the car. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, just holding the paper in my lap. The name at the top, Prestige Planners, felt like a punch. I remembered the way Caroline had bragged about them, how they only booked 6 weddings a year, how they flew in linens from Italy and designed custom lighting. I remember thinking at the time, who's paying for all this? Now I knew. I didn't go home. I drove across town toward the small brick office where my father still kept a desk. The sign out front still read Ellison Realty Group, though the parking lot only had 2 cars. I sat in the lot for a minute, then got out and walked up the steps. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were on low. He was behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, reading something that looked more like a past due notice than a contract. When he saw me, he looked tired. "Margaret," he said like he hadn't expected me to actually show. I didn't wait for pleasantries. I set the printout from the bank down in front of him. "You used my money for the wedding." He didn't answer right away, just rubbed his forehead and looked off toward the window. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he said. "We were short on everything. The business was crumbling and your mother thought we'd figure it out later." "Figure it out later?" I asked. "I gave you $25,000 over the years quietly, without question, and you just took more when I said no." He tried to explain, said the planning had snowballed, said Caroline's wedding was tied to her brand and there were eyes on it, sponsors watching. He said it like it was something I should have understood, like any of it had anything to do with me. "Did Caroline know?" I asked. His pause was just long enough to be an answer. "She needed the wedding to go off without problems," he said. "Your mom didn't want to upset her." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like the only thing I could do without shouting. I didn't ask for an apology, and he didn't offer one. I picked up the printout, folded it in half, and left the office without saying anything else. Back at home, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Caroline had posted another honeymoon photo. A pool, a sun hat, the caption, "Protect your peace at all costs." I stared at it for a long time, then took a screenshot and added it to my folder. Later that evening, Nathan called. I told him everything: the meeting at the bank, the visit to Dad, the confirmation. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You need to hold them accountable. This isn't just a misunderstanding, Margaret. It's theft." The words sat in the air. I didn't respond right away. I thought about every birthday check I'd written, every late-night Venmo transfer to help Caroline when her card was temporarily frozen, every dinner I paid for without hesitation. I thought about my mom brushing me off on the phone, the security guard with the tablet, my father saying they'd deal with it later. I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote down one line: I wasn't invited, but I helped pay for the whole thing. That night, I searched online for local attorneys who handled financial disputes and small claims. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I was done waiting for someone else to fix it. I bookmarked a name, a woman who specialized in family business disputes, and made a note to call her first thing in the morning. I sat at the window for a while before bed, watching the lights across the street flicker off one by one. I could hear the soft sounds of a TV through the wall and the rustle of tree branches outside. I thought about how long I'd spent trying to be the one who kept the peace, the quiet one, the helper. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all. I turned off the light. The next morning, I made the call. The attorney's office was in South End, tucked between a bakery and a printing shop, nothing flashy. Her name was Nora Harper. She'd come highly recommended by a colleague I trusted, someone who said she was steady sharp and didn't scare easy. The receptionist fit me in for that afternoon. I took my folder with me, the bank statements, the list of payments, the screenshot from Caroline's Instagram. It was all there, tucked inside a manila cover I'd labeled in pencil. When I arrived, Nora met me in a small office with tall windows and a faint smell of peppermint tea. She had a calm way of speaking, like she didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. I told her everything, from the early payments to the wedding day. I didn't cry, though my throat tightened more than once. She listened without interruption, just nodding now and then as she took notes. When I finished, she sat back and folded her hands. "If your name is on the account," she said, "you have a right to see where every dollar went. What they did taking that money without consent is something we can challenge." She asked me for documentation. I handed over the printouts and the list I'd made in my notebook. She read through them carefully, flipping each page slowly, her expression focused. When she finished, she looked up and said, "We'll start by requesting full account records from the bank. If there's a pattern of misuse, we'll have grounds for a formal claim. This isn't just a family matter anymore. It's financial misconduct." The word hung in the air for a moment. I nodded. It was the first time someone outside the family had said it plainly. Back home, I opened my laptop again. Caroline had posted a new story, just a quote this time, white text on a beige background. "Sometimes it's your own people who try to bring you down." I didn't save it. I didn't respond. I just added it to the folder. That evening, I drafted a letter. It wasn't legal yet, just something I wrote for myself, a demand for transparency. I laid out the numbers, the dates, the total sum I'd contributed, and the withdrawal that broke the trust. I didn't send it. I just needed to see it on paper. 2 days later, the Charlotte Observer ran a short article, "Turner Properties Files for Bankruptcy." The story mentioned rising debts, a failed development deal, and mounting pressure from creditors. My parents' names were in the body of the article listed as managing partners. There was a photo of their office, dark and closed for the day. I read the article 3 times. A few hours later, someone slid a letter under my apartment door. I recognized the handwriting. My mother's. The envelope was thin, folded unevenly like she'd rushed it. Inside, she'd written only one line. "Margaret, we're losing everything. Please, we need you." I set it down without opening it again. I called Nora the next morning. "They've filed for bankruptcy," I told her. She asked for a copy of the article. I emailed it while we spoke. "This changes the scope," she said. "If they're declaring bankruptcy, every financial record will be audited, including that account. Your claim can be filed with the court as part of the proceeding." We met again that afternoon. Her office was quieter this time, the receptionist gone for lunch, the windows open to the breeze. She had my documents organized in a slim binder, now labeled and tabbed. "Once we file," she said, "it's official. The court will review your claim and determine whether your funds were misused. If they find evidence of fraud, it could open a wider investigation." I didn't hesitate. "Do it," I said. Back at home, I found a text from my dad. Just a short message. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. Later that night, Nathan stopped by again. He brought soup and didn't ask if I wanted company. I told him about the claim about the letter from Mom and about the article. He listened quietly, then said, "You've done more for them than they ever did for you. It's time they faced that." The next day, I received confirmation from Nora. The claim had been filed with the bankruptcy court. We were officially on record. Caroline's account began to shift too. Her posts were less frequent now. The comments turned harsher questions about the wedding, the funding, the silence. Someone had linked the article under one of her photos. She deleted it within minutes, but screenshots were already circulating on gossip pages. A few nights later, I got another message from my mom. This one came through email. The subject line read, "You're hurting the family." Inside, she wrote, "Whatever Natalie told you, don't believe her. She's stirring up things that don't need to be aired in court." I didn't know who Natalie was, not yet, but I didn't respond. Instead, I added the email to my folder. The file was thicker now. More than numbers and screenshots, it held the shape of something bigger. Not just what they took, but how they treated me when I said no. That night, I opened the folder one more time. I read every line I'd written, every payment, every time I'd offered help, every time they'd called me reliable but never important. The words didn't sting the way they had before. They felt like a line drawn in the sand. I turned off the light and went to bed. 3 days after I filed the claim, I got a voicemail from a woman named Natalie Ford. Her voice was clear, professional, but cautious. She said she'd worked for my father's company as a bookkeeper up until 5 months ago. She left a number, said it was about something she'd found before she quit. I called her back within the hour. We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town, one of those quiet places with cracked leather chairs and music low enough not to interfere. She was maybe mid-30s, soft-spoken, but sharp. The kind of woman who noticed everything but didn't say more than she needed to. She slid a folder across the table. "I made copies," she said. "I figured you'd need them." Inside were statements I hadn't seen: withdrawals, expense reimbursements, personal purchases, marked as business write-offs. There were invoices from prestige planners dating back nearly a year. Even before the wedding was officially announced, money had been moving. They used company funds, she said. At first it was small things, venue deposits, event tastings. But once the business started going under, they began shifting it, pulling from joint accounts, listing payments under consulting fees. When I asked questions, I was told to keep quiet. I flipped through each page slowly. One of the charges was dated the day after I'd told them I couldn't help financially. A $12,000 payment. My name wasn't on the receipt, but the account number was the same as the one I'd contributed to for years. Natalie looked uneasy. "I stayed longer than I should have," she said. "Your dad asked me to reclassify a few entries to bury them under general operating costs." I refused. That's when I realized it wasn't just messy bookkeeping. They were covering something up. I asked her why she was coming forward now. She said she'd seen my name in the bankruptcy filings, saw the claim I'd submitted. "It didn't sit right," she said. "I kept thinking if it were me, I'd want someone to tell me the truth." We talked for over an hour. She handed me the folder to keep. As I left, she said quietly, "They always talked like you were the strong one, the one who never asked for anything." Then she looked down, almost embarrassed. "I think that's why they thought they could get away with it." I took the folder straight to Nora. Her eyes narrowed as she flipped through the pages. "This is fraud," she said without hesitation. They moved personal expenses through a company already heading toward insolvency, and they pulled from a shared personal account without full consent. This isn't just about you anymore. It could affect the entire bankruptcy case. We filed an addendum to my claim that afternoon. By the end of the week, word had spread. Caroline's Instagram was suddenly quiet. Her husband deleted his account entirely. Someone sent me a screenshot from a wedding forum one of the vendors had posted anonymously about not being paid in full. A pattern was forming. Quiet at first, but growing. Then came the subpoena. A court-appointed auditor contacted me for an interview. They were reviewing the financial records from both the business and the personal accounts tied to the bankruptcy. I handed over everything: the folder Natalie gave me, the emails, the bank statements, even the messages I'd saved from my mom. Nora sat in on the call. The auditor didn't say much, but I could tell they'd seen enough to ask hard questions. They requested access logs to the business accounts, itemized spending from the event planner. They asked about my parents' assets, cars, jewelry properties. I answered what I could. The rest would come out in discovery. That evening, I found another letter in my mailbox. This one was typed, my father's name signed at the bottom. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. "Margaret, this has gone too far. You're not thinking clearly. The damage you're doing can't be undone." I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even disappointment anymore. It was clarity. For the first time, I could see it all without second-guessing myself. Every time I'd bailed them out, every time they'd turned the story around to make it seem like I was ungrateful, every time I'd let it slide, telling myself family was complicated. But this wasn't complicated. This was theft, and they'd done it because they thought I wouldn't fight back. The next day, the court issued a freeze on all remaining assets tied to the business and personal accounts. A full audit was underway. Caroline and her husband were officially named in the proceedings. So was my mother. I read the filing 3 times, each name in black and white. Nora called that evening. "They'll likely try to settle," she said. "They'll want to keep this out of full litigation. But we hold the leverage now. You decide how far this goes." I didn't answer right away, just looked out the window, the street lamp casting a dull yellow glow across the floor. In the distance, I could hear a dog barking, a screen door closing, the ordinary sound of a neighborhood carrying on. "They made a choice," I said quietly. "Now I'm making mine." She paused. "I'll be ready." As we ended the call, I felt something shift. Not relief, not victory, just a stillness, like the moment after a storm when the air is heavy and the ground feels steady again. I went to the folder one last time that night, tucked Natalie's pages in with the rest, labeled the new section Verified. Then I closed the file and slid it back into the drawer. It started with a headline on the local news website. Ellison Properties, under investigation, following bankruptcy audit. The article was brief but firm. The company, long considered a staple in the community, was now being formally investigated for misappropriation of funds. The piece mentioned inflated wedding expenses payments labeled as consulting and a dispute raised by a former employee and a family member. They didn't name me, but it wasn't hard to read between the lines. By the next morning, 3 more vendors had come forward. A photographer, a catering company, even the string quartet. All claimed they'd been shorted on payments or ghosted entirely. Nora forwarded me the statements as they rolled in. One line at a time, the truth was stitching itself together. A court hearing was scheduled within the week. I sat at the back of the courtroom, quiet, steady. Caroline was there, her hair pulled into a tight bun, no sign of the bright lipstick or curated charm I used to see on her social media. Her husband sat beside her, arms crossed. My parents were on the opposite side, just 2 rows behind the defense table. My mother had on a navy suit I'd seen before, one she always wore when trying to look composed. My father didn't look at me when I walked in. The judge read the findings out loud. Systematic misuse of company funds. Deliberate concealment of financial transactions during bankruptcy proceedings, pending civil penalties. A recommendation for restitution pending final mediation. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just listened. The judge didn't mince words. This court finds that there was an intentional effort to reclassify and obscure personal expenses for the financial benefit of the defendants at the expense of both creditors and invested partners. My name was read at the end, not as a defendant, but as a key creditor. The judge acknowledged the funds I'd contributed, verifying they had in fact been rerouted without consent. Then he turned to the defense table. You will be required to pay restitution both to Ms. Ellison and to the entities named in the vendor claims or face further legal action. Outside the courtroom, a reporter was waiting by the steps. I didn't stop to talk. I kept walking. The sunlight was harsh that day, and everything around me looked overly bright, as if the truth had peeled something back that couldn't be covered again. The settlement came 2 weeks later. Nora called me into her office with a printout in her hand. They offered full repayment, she said, plus damages. The vendors are being paid out separately. And she paused, tapping the folder. They've agreed to forfeit their remaining shares in the business, which the court is transferring to a trust until further dissolution is decided. I stared at the numbers. Not just what I was owed, but everything they had taken. The trust now included the office building downtown, the last property not already sold off or leveraged to debt. Nora looked at me carefully. You can walk away, Margaret. Take the funds and close this chapter. Or you can rebuild something with it. It's yours now. I didn't answer that day. I went home, sat on my porch, and watched the street go quiet as the sun dipped below the trees. That weekend, Caroline called. I let it ring twice before answering. She didn't start with hello. She said, "Was it worth it?" Her voice was strained, like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why she did it. I just said, "It was never about revenge." There was a long pause. Then she said, "You've made your point," and hung up. 3 days later, I received a handwritten note in the mail. From my mother, no envelope, just folded once carefully. "You've always been the quiet one. Maybe we mistook your silence for weakness. We were wrong. It wasn't an apology. But it was the closest I'd ever get. I didn't call them back. Not yet. Some truths take time to settle, and some spaces don't need to be filled just because they're empty. Instead, I returned to the trust papers. Read every word. The building was old but solid. It had once held the offices of the company I grew up watching my father run. Now it belonged to me. Not through inheritance, not through guilt, through truth. I walked through it the next morning with a clipboard and a locksmith. The front door still had the name Ellison Properties stenciled in gold on the glass. I stood there for a long moment, then tapped the glass. "Take it down," I said. The locksmith glanced over. "New name going up?" I nodded. "Eventually." By the time the sun came up the next day, the name was gone. The first day I reopened the building, it was quiet. Just me, a clipboard, and a cup of coffee from the place down the street where the barista knew my name but never asked questions. I'd had a new sign made simple, no gold stenciling, just black lettering across the glass. It read, Harbor and Pine Independent Consulting. I chose the name for no reason but that it felt calm, rooted, like I wanted to be. The inside still smelled faintly of old carpet glue and stale printer ink, but I walked from room to room, tapping on walls, making notes. I wasn't building an empire. I wasn't interested in legacy. I just wanted to create a space where integrity wasn't optional. One room at a time, I cleared it out. Old files, outdated furniture, brittle blinds that cracked when the sun hit them just right. I kept one desk my father's. I didn't keep it out of sentiment. I kept it as a reminder. It sat in the far corner of a small office in the back, stripped bare, except for a single photo I'd set on it, me and Nathan, from last fall, sitting on a park bench with 2 cups of cider and wind in our hair. Nathan came by that afternoon. He walked through the entryway with his hands in his coat pockets and let out a low whistle. "You really did it," he said. I smiled. "Yeah, I did." We sat on the floor in the front room, leaning against a wall that hadn't yet been painted. The late sun spilled across the floorboards. He handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a flyer he'd pulled from the community board outside the coffee shop. Small businesses offering services, graphic designers, junior marketers, young women trying to get a foot in the door. "You thinking about hiring?" he asked. I looked down at the names. "I'm thinking about mentoring," I said. He nodded, didn't press further. My family didn't reach out again. Not after the settlement, not after the building reopened. The silence wasn't loud. It was clean like the air after a storm. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't carrying the weight of what I'd hoped they'd be. Some ties don't need to be mended. Some need to be gently set down and left behind. Months passed. The office took shape. A few clients found their way to me, small, honest work, the kind that felt good to do. I got used to locking the door at night and feeling proud, not empty. Sometimes I still hear my father's voice in my mind, sharp and certain, "You're not on the list." And sometimes I think that was the best thing he could have said, because I stopped trying to be on lists made by people who only saw value in visibility, not in quiet strength. I built something of my own, not from spite, but from clarity. Not to prove anything, but to live in peace with who I'd become. And that's what I'd say to anyone who's ever stood outside a door that should have been open to them. Walk away if you must. But walk towards something honest, something yours. Thank you for listening to my story. If it stayed with you, feel free to share it with someone who needs it. Or just take a breath right now and remind yourself you don't need to be invited to your own life. You're already here.